Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed Gimel contains one Mishnah. The first half of the Daf, before the Mishnah, is discussing whether Bris Milah can be performed in a situation where it violates an Isser of cutting off a Nega Tzoras. The Mishnah then takes us deeper into the halachos of Milah itself, describes what the actual steps in a Bris Milah are, and which of them are permitted on Shabbos and which are not, meaning which are necessary for the Milah and which are extra. And then the Gemara will try to derive the source of some of the halachos about the steps of Milah, and we'll discuss a few of the things mentioned in the Mishnah more specifically. So first of all, the Gemara begins with the following observation. We had at the end of the previous Daf a machlokes between two Amoraim, Rav and Rav Safra, as to whether or not you can have a kal v'chomer from Shabbos to Tzaras. Can we say that since Shabbos is a very serious Isser, it includes kares and it includes skila, and yet you're allowed to push away the halachos of Shabbos in order to do a bris milah on Shabbos? Does that automatically mean that you're allowed to do a bris milah in a situation where you have to push away the Isser, just a regular lav of cutting off a nega tzaras? Can you make a kal v'chomer? If you can push away Shabbos, you can push away the Isser of cutting off tzaras. So the Gemara had said that was a machlokes between Rav and Rav Safra. Now the Gemara observes that that's actually a machlokes tanoim. We have a brisa. The brisa says, how do you know that you're allowed to do a bris milah even though you'll be cutting off a nega tzaras on the foreskin? And it brings two approaches. The Tanna Kama says, from the extra word basar, it's bisar actually, in the psukim describing the bris, and Rabbi Yeshaya, that's Rabbi Yeshaya's opinion, and Rabbi Yonason says it comes from the kal v'chomer. So you see, you have a machlokes whether or not you can rely on that kal v'chomer. Okay, now the Gemara is going to get into the discussion of Eina Miskaven. If you think about it, cutting off that nega tzaras is a davar she'eina miskaven. You don't intend to cut off the nega tzaras, you intend to do a bris milah. So why should there be a problem? So we're going to have some discussion as to who therefore needs this word bisar at all. We'll have two parallel Gemaras, one applying this entire discussion to our issue, and one applying it to a totally different issue. So first of all, in our first version, the Gemara asks as follows. The Gemara says, why do you need this extra word bisar? The word bisar, which teaches you're allowed to cut off an nega tzaras when you're doing a bris milah. Why is there a problem? It's a davar she'eina miskaven. You don't intend to cut it off, it just gets cut off by itself. It's a total side effect. And we know that that is permitted, at least according to Rabbi Shimon. So Gemara says two versions of this answer. Either Abaye, who says that you're right, this only works according to Rabbi Yehuda. Only Rabbi Yehuda holds that it would be a problem even though it's saying miskaven, and therefore you need the word bisar to say it's permitted. And Rava, who says no, even Rabbi Shimon agrees here that it's a problem, because this is what's called a psik reisha. You're definitely going to cut it off. It's not a side effect which may or may not occur. It's definitely going to occur. And even Rabbi Shimon agrees in that situation it's forbidden, and it doesn't help you that it's saying miskaven. Now the Gemara observes, hold on a second, Abaye also says that. Abaye also agrees the psik reisha Rabbi Shimon holds is a problem. So how does Abaye give a different answer? The Gemara says this is where Abaye got it from. Abaye, from this conversation with Rava, he changed his opinion and he said, oh, you're right, Rabbi Shimon would agree to psik reisha, and henceforth on he would say that Rava is really correct. Rabbi Shimon would agree that a psik reisha is a problem. Now the Gemara has another whole version of this, and that's we said this entire discussion we weren't referring to cutting off a nega tzaras by doing a bris milah. We're referring to somebody who has tzaras on his shoulder or on his foot and he wants to do work, and that involves carrying a heavy beam on his shoulder or something along those lines, and it may scrape the nega off by itself. Is he allowed to do that work? So the Gemara learns from a pasuk, Yishamar b'nega tzaras lishma moed v'lasais. Lasais means to do. You're allowed to do your work, and if it gets scraped off, not a problem. And the Gemara asks, why do you need the pasuk? It's a davar she'eina miskaven. The Gemara answers, Abaye says it's Rabbi Yehuda, and Rava says it's Rabbi Shimon. And the Gemara says, but what do you mean? Abaye agrees. And the Gemara says, yeah, this is where he got it from. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know, hold on a second. According to Abaye's original understanding, where he said that you only need the pasuk, the extra word of bisar, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So according to Rabbi Shimon, what's the word for? It's an extra word. So the Gemara says it's for the following thing. It's for a situation in which the person who's doing the milah intends to cut off the nega tzaras in order to become tahor. He says, yeah, I'm doing a bris milah, but I also intend to cut that off. I want to get rid of it. In a situation like that, he does not have any heter. He doesn't have any justification to do that and say it's eina miskaven. It's not eina miskaven. It is miskaven. He does intend to do it. So he says, okay, that makes sense by a bris milah of an adult who can have such intent, but a bris milah of a child, you have the same word bisar, and the child couldn't have such intent. And the says, yes, that's correct, but the father who's doing the bris milah could have that intent. And it's coming to teach us that It's not called Ein Miskavin. You are allowed to do it. However, you should try to avoid it. You should try to get somebody else to do the bris who is not going to intend to cut off the nega from the child, because you don't push away mitzvahs, you don't violate an isra, even if you're allowed to, because you have a different mitzvah that you have to do that's more important. Still, you shouldn't try to violate, you should try to do it in a way that you don't have to violate any other isurim, and therefore you should try to get somebody else who's going to do this. The Gemara now refers to its next topic, which is going back to, again, something you saw on the previous daf, and that is that we had seen halacha that you're only allowed to do a bris milah on Shabbos or on Yom Tov if it is a bris milah in its right time, meaning on the 8th day from the child's birth. If it is any other time, obviously later, then you would not be allowed to do it. It does not push away Shabbos or Yom Tov. The Gemara wants to know, how do you know that? What's the source? And the Gemara is going to give 4 potential sources. The first source is Chizkiah. Chizkiah says you learn out of the carbon Pesach. Carbon Pesach that's left over has to be burned, but the Torah tells you don't burn it the day after you eat the carbon. You don't burn it on the 15th, which is Yom Tov. You burn it the day following that, which is already Chol HaMoed. You don't burn it on Yom Tov itself. Why? Because you see, you're not supposed to be doing weekday things on Yom Tov. So anything which you could do during the week, you shouldn't do on a Yom Tov. The same applies to this Milah. You could have done it during the week. It's not Milah on time. You could have done it before. You could have done it after. Therefore, you don't have to do it on Yom Tov itself. It doesn't push away Yom Tov itself. By the way, what is the source that you're allowed to, that you're supposed to burn the carbon Pesach leftovers on Chol Moed, not Yom Tov? Because the pasuk which describes burning it says, "V'leisasir mimenu ad boker." It says it says an expression of leaving over till the morning twice. One of them is extra to tell you push it to the second morning, which is Chol Moed. Okay, that's the first source. Second source is from Carbon Ola. Carbon Ola, it says you should bring it Ola Shabbos b'Shabbato. The carbon of Shabbos on Shabbos itself. That means not a weekday carbon on Shabbos. Again, this is a source that you don't do a weekday things on Shabbos. If you could do it during the weekday, it's meant to be done during the weekday. Therefore, bris milah that could be done during the weekday should not be done on Shabbos. Next source comes from Rava. Rava says the pasuk describing the fact that you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov says, "Hu levade ye'asol lechem." This is the only thing that you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. There are 2 minimizations there. There's the word hu, this, and there's the word levade, only. Hu is to tell me you cannot prepare for cooking. You're only allowed to do cooking itself. And levade is to tell me that you're not allowed to do a bris milah, which is not in the right time. Now, all these 3 bring a pasuk to tell you that you're not allowed to do a bris milah, which is not in its right time on Yom Tov. The Gemara wants to know, why do I need a pasuk for that? And the Gemara explains, because I could have had the kavachanmer that I had before, which we saw earlier, that since Mila beats Tzaras and Tzaras beats Avodah and Avodah beats Shabbos and Yom Tov, I might think that you may be allowed to do this Mila, and therefore we need these psukim to tell you that you can't. Rav Ashi says you don't need to have any extra words, you just apply the regular rules. Keeping Yom Tov has a los asay and an asay involved. It says Shabboson, you should rest, that's a mitzvah's asay. It also says don't do malacha, that's a mitzvah's los asay. And asay and los asay together will always beat doing bris milah, which is just a mitzvah's asay, and therefore you cannot do it unless you have a special source, obviously, which is the word biyom, which only applies when it's on its right time. If it's on its wrong time, you don't have a special source. And if you go back to the old rules, a lois say and an asay together beat an asay, and therefore you would not do this bris if it's not in the right time on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Okay, finishing up before the next Mishnah, we just refer all the way back to our last Mishnah, which was a few daf ago, where we had a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. You're allowed to prepare for bris milah on Shabbos. You have to do all the preparations you can do before Shabbos. Gemara says, halachas like Rabbi Akiva, you're not allowed to do preparatory malachas on Shabbos. Gemara says you have a very similar machlokes about a carbon Pesach, where Erev Pesach falls out on a Shabbos. You are allowed to do the basic work of the carbon Pesach on Shabbos. What about preparing or doing other things to prepare the carbon to be eaten? So that same machlokes applies over there. Rabbi Akiva says you're not allowed to do anything which you could do during the week on Shabbos itself. You're only allowed to do things which you have to do on Shabbos. Gemara has a quote from Rabbi Yehuda, who says in both cases, he says separately in each case that the halachas like Rabbi Akiva. Gemara wants to, why does he have to say it twice? It's the same machlokes. Tell it to me once. Gemara says, no, if I only told you the halacha in one place it's like Rabbi Akiva, I may not know in the other place. If I only told you about Shabbos, that's because Shabbos doesn't have 12 brisos involved. It's not. If I only told you about carbon Pesach, if I only told you that carbon Pesach is allowed to be done on Shabbos, but you're not allowed to do its preparations, I may think that's because carbon Pesach is a weak mitzvah compared to Milah. Milah has 13 brisos involved with it. So maybe I can do those preparations on Shabbos. And if he only told you bris Milah, that's because the Milah of a child does not involve kares. The child's too young for kares, and the mole doesn't get kares. But somebody who violates carbon Pesach doesn't bring it, does get kares, and I think therefore he's allowed to do even preparatory things on Shabbos, although we could have done them during the week. Okay, this concludes this Gemara, and now we begin the next Mishnah. The Mishnah proceeds to list the 6 essential steps of Milah which override Shabbos. You're allowed to do them on Shabbos even though they involve Malacha. And then it starts off actually by saying you're allowed to do anything which is necessary for Milah on Shabbos. The Gemara is going to ask what that extra phrase is for. And then it gives you the 6 steps, and they are as follows. First of all, there's the actual Milah that involves the cutting of the foreskin. Then there's Peria, which is peeling the remnants of the skin and the membrane which is under it off the head of the aver. Then there is a suction that has to be applied to the wound. Then there's putting on a bandage and powders which are apply a medication to help stop the bleeding. And you're also supposed to put on wine and oil that helps keep out infection. And the last step is to put a little cloth cap on the head so that the foreskin and the membrane don't slide back on and become reattached. You wouldn't want that to happen. So these are all the 6 steps which you're allowed to do on Shabbos. It does say that if you could do a shino, you should. So let's say you forgot to grind up the powders to put on the wound, so you should chew them up with your teeth instead of grinding them with the grinder. If you didn't mix the oil and the wine together beforehand, you should put them on one at a time. And if you didn't make the cap, so you should just use a rag. And if you don't have a rag, then you should bring one from Shabbos, not by carrying it through the street in your hand, but by wrapping it around your finger. That way you do something different, or strange way of doing each of these, which is not an actual malacha deraisa. It makes it only malacha derabanan, and then you are somewhat minimizing the malacha you have to do. Gemara now begins and asks, what is this extra phrase for? What are we including when we say anything that is needed for the meal you're allowed to do? What is that including? And the Gemara says it's the following halacha. Every brisa that says somebody who does a bris milah and then he realizes that he left over bits of skin that he should really cut off. So this is what the Gemara calls a tzitzin, strips of skin. So sometimes those strips of skin are problematic and they make the milah incomplete and not done properly. That's called tzitzin hamakvin. That's when the majority of the head, the highest ridge of the flesh of the aver, is still covered by that layer of skin. That has to be cut off. That is not an accomplished milah and has to be removed. It has to be trimmed. So since the milah has not been performed, so you're allowed to go back in and do that on Shabbos. If, however, it's extra bits of skin that the milah is kosher without it, it's not covering the majority of the ridge, so the halacha is as follows. As long as you're still involved in doing the milah, you haven't stopped, you haven't finished it, so you're still involved in the process. You're allowed to go back and trim and do whatever else you have to do, even though it's not necessary for the milah to be a kosher milah, because it's all still involved, and therefore the heter of overriding Hilchos Shabbos is allowed. However, once you stopped, you finished the milah, you want to go back, these trimmings are not significant enough for you to go back and be Machal Shabbos to do them. You could trim them off after Shabbos, but not on Shabbos. And that is what we learn out of this extra phrase. Now the Gemara wants to know, who is the Tana that says this? Where do we see this halacha, that as long as you're still involved, you're allowed to continue, but once you stop, you can't go back? The Gemara is going to go all around Shas to a number of very different, unconnected sugyas at all, and try to find somebody who says a similar halacha, that once you're involved, you're allowed to continue, but once you stop, you have to stop, you can't go back on Shabbos, and we're going to have a couple of different attempts to see who this Tana is. The Gemara's first attempt is that this is Rabbi Yishmael, son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika. This is a machlokes that we have seen earlier in the Masechta, where we're discussing when a Korban Pesach is brought on Shabbos, Erev Pesach comes out on Shabbos, and the question is, how much of the skin are you allowed to strip off? So Rabbi Shmuel says up until the chest, and the Chacham say you're allowed to strip the entire skin off. What's the issue there? When you reach the chest, you actually stop skinning, and then you start removing some of the parts. You remove the head, you remove the front legs. These are a few of the things that you do, and then you go back to the skinning. So Rabbi Shmuel's opinion seems to be that once you've stopped skinning, you don't have a right to go back and continue skinning. But the Chachamim seem to say that you can go back to the skinning, it's all still included. So that would seem to be the same in Machlokes. He's saying once you stopped, you can't go back and continue. You were allowed to start, it was included as long as you were continuing the Chilul Shabbos that you were allowed to do. It was okay, but once you stopped, you can't go back. The Gemara rejects this because it says not necessarily would Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Yochanan ben Breika, say that over here as well. It could be over there. The only reason why they said that you're not allowed to continue is because there is no issue of making the carbon beautiful. We know that there's a rule that's based on the phrase Zekeli v'anveyu. At least one understanding of that phrase is that anveyu means na'ah, and you're supposed to make all mitzvahs be beautiful. So as far as a carbon, it's not any more beautiful or less beautiful if you keep skinny. And therefore Rabbi Shmuel would say there is no reason why we should allow you to go back and continue to skin it. However, as far as the milah, you do want the milah to be beautiful. You want it to be as nicely presented as it can be. And therefore the mitzvah of Zakeli Vanvei would tell you that you're allowed to go back to it and continue it. So it could be that Rabbi Shmuel himself would agree here that you're allowed to go back to it and continue it even if you stopped. Now the Gemara just brings in a brisa that explains Zekeli Vanvei. The Gemara says the first opinion is that it means that everything has to be beautiful. You should make beautiful sukkah, beautiful lulav, beautiful shofar, beautiful tzitzis, beautiful sefer Torah. It should be written with beautiful ink, with a beautiful quill, and by an expert sofer. It should be wrapped in beautiful cloths. Now, Abba Shal has a different understanding of Zakeli Vanveyu. He says Vanveyu is a contraction of the words Ani Vahu, me and him, that you should be like Hashem, just like He is merciful, you should be, and just like He is gracious, you should be. Okay. So, anyway, we've rejected the pshat that our Mishnah is Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika, and the Gemara brings another pshat here, and the Gemara says this is Rabbi Yosi. What's the discussion there? It's about somebody who sees the moon and he has information to declare that it's Rosh Chodesh. So he's supposed to go travel to tell the Beis that he saw the moon. He's allowed to do that even if it's on Shabbos, and even if he has to go outside the Tchum, even if he has to violate the halacha of Shabbos. Question is, what if it's a very clear, crystal clear, easily visible moon, and we can assume that the Beis themselves would have seen it? You know, do you still have to go travel and be Machal Shabbos or not? So that's a machlokas. Rabbi Yosi says, no, you don't go. And Chachamim say that you do go. So the Gemara wants to apply that machlokas here. Rabbi Yosi, who says that, listen, if it's not necessary for you to go, then you can't. You cannot include it in your Chilul Shabbos. So here also, it's not necessary for you to cut off those extra strips of skin, so therefore you shouldn't be allowed to include it in the Chilul Shabbos. And the Gemara again rejects this, because the Gemara says this is very different. Over there, you have no reason to be Chilul Shabbos in the first place. You stay at home. You don't have to start a Chilul Shabbos. Here, Chilul Shabbos started. You anyway started being Machal Shabbos by doing the Bris Milah. The question is, can you continue? Can you go back to it? So it could be that even Rabbi Yosi would agree that you can go back to it. So the Gemara tries the third option, and this one the Gemara will stick with, and it's actually we're talking about when the Kohanim changed the breads of the Lechem Apanim. You know, the Shulchan, the table in the Beis HaMikdash was set up with 12 Lechem Apanim, show breads. It was 2 columns of 6 each, and on top of each column was a spoonful of Levona spices. So how did they change it? When they brought the new ones, the Gemara says you had 8 Kohanim. 4 went to take out the old breads, 1 for each row and 1 for each spoon of spices, and then you had 4 who brought the new ones. So the new ones would stand on the north side of the shulchan, the old ones would stand on the south side, they face each other, and as they removed the breads, they slid in the new ones. That way it was never empty at all. Why? Because it says that they are called Lifnei Hashem Tameh. They have to always be there. You can't have a moment when it's empty. So as you slid one out, you slid the next one in. That's the opinion of the Rabbanan. Rabbi Yosi disagrees. He says, no, as long as you put it in the same day, it doesn't have to be the exact second. It's only called empty if you left it overnight, not being full. So the Gemara wants to say that this opinion of the Chachamim would seem to be our Mishnah here. It says that you have to, in order for it to be considered to be still going, you have to keep it. You have to keep the Lechem Panim there all the time. You can't have a moment when it's empty. According to Rabbi Yosi, it would not be that way. You could leave it and come back to it. So our Chachamim must be the ones that say once you left it, you can't come back. It's not a continuation. Just like the Lechem Apanim, it's not a continuation if there's a gap in between, and the Gemara accepts that this is the source that says that once you've left it, the mitzvah is over, and you can't go back to continue the Bris Milah. Okay, on to a slightly different subject. The Gemara quotes a brisa which says that you have to trim off all the parts of skin that are makiv, that are necessary for the bris, and somebody who doesn't trim it properly ends up with a violation of kares. Now, there's 2 possible kareses here. There could be the kares of not having a proper milah, or it could be the kares of violating Shabbos. Which one were we referring to over here? So the Gemara has 3 attempts here. The Gemara's first explanation is that referring to the moil. And the kares is because he violated Shabbos. Why? Because he did a bris on Shabbos. That's what we're referring to. He did a bris on Shabbos, and he didn't do it properly because he didn't cut off the strips of skin that he has to, and therefore the bris was no good. So what ends up happening? He didn't do a kosher bris. He just did Chol Shabbos. He made a wound on Shabbos for no reason. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? He started the milah. The wound that he did was incomplete. It was still a kosher milah, it just wasn't finished. Somebody else could finish it, or he could finish it. Whatever it is, what he did, you can't call it Chil Shabbos. He started a milah the way he's supposed to. So the Gemara says, okay, we're not talking about him, we're talking about an adult milah where it was not performed properly, and the kares is because he doesn't have a milah. It's not done in a kosher way. So the Gemara says for that I don't need a brisa to tell me any non-kosher milah is kares. That's a pasuk explicitly. V'oral zachar shlo yimol. So the Gemara says the third thing, no, we're going to go back to the mile. It's the mile's fault. And the case is where he should never have started. He didn't have time to finish before Shabbos began. People told him, you're not going to have time to finish. And he said, no, I am going to have time to finish. And he started, and he didn't finish before Shabbos. He ended up finishing on Shabbos. That was a violation of Shabbos. He should never have started, and then he wouldn't have had to do anything on Shabbos at all. Okay, referring back to the Mishnah where we said that one of the steps is you have to apply suction and you're allowed to do it on Shabbos, the Gemara says that Rav Papa makes a statement that if somebody who is a male and doesn't apply suction is causing danger to the life of the child, and he should be fired. So the Gemara says, of course, if we're allowing you to do it on Shabbos, obviously it's a sakana. Why else would you let you do that on Shabbos? It's not part of the milah, it's part of the milah process because it's a necessary thing to do, and we're letting you do it on Shabbos. Obviously it's because it's a sakana, it's a danger to the child's health if you don't do it. Someone says, no, I would have thought the reason you're allowed to do it on Shabbos is because the blood of the milah is not absorbed in the flesh. It's just a pocket of blood there. That is not forbidden to extract on Shabbos. It's only absorbed blood that's forbidden. And therefore, I would have thought that the reason why you're allowed to do it on Shabbos is not because it's a sakana if you don't do it, it's because it's not an isser to do it. And therefore, we're coming to say, no, it is a sakana, and that's why you're allowed to do it, but really it is absorbed in the flesh. Okay. We also saw in the Mishnah that you're allowed to apply a bandage and a balm of sorts, a medicated powder or mixture. So Gemara has some medical statements here. Abaye says, my mother, and that's not his birth mother, that's his adoptive mother, she used to say that the cure for all wounds is a mixture made of 7 parts animal fat and 1 part wax. Rava said it's 1 part wax mixed with sap, tree sap. Now, Rava went to Mechuzah, and he was speaking over there, and he said this cure, and all the people of Menyume Asya, that's Asia, tore their clothing in anguish because he had just given away their secret medication that they used to sell to people. So he said, don't worry, I left you one cure that I didn't give away. Somebody who washes his face with water and doesn't dry well, and he gets cracked skin, the solution to that is to wash his face with beet juice.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.